question. Right. Please. From here? Yeah. Those stickers thing. They got the sensitivity you have to set it at. By the time you go to all the trouble, you could just plug it in the remote switch. Yeah. Lock it and let go of it. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Probably easier. I also don't know. I don't have any intuition on the sensitivity range on those because I built my own triggers. Oh, do you? Yeah. So, like some of these guys use my ops enough that they can tell you where to set it. Yeah.
We're live. Just have to. All right, good morning everyone, and welcome to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where we are looking live at the Falcon 9 on Launch Complex 40. Here as the SpaceX teams work through the final round of their countdown before we head into fueling. Right now we're about 58 minutes away from our scheduled launch time, and the teams will have conducted a technical poll to ensure that we are ready to proceed down into our count today. So the image is bobbing up and down just a little bit. That's just a function of the wind and the tripod and how it's weighted down as much as it can be, but hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. But we will be here through our launch today to give you up close and personal views of the Falcon 9 and provide updates as they go through the fueling process. So stay with us. We will be back and we'll talk a little bit more about this mission. We'll talk about why there isn't a fairing recovery attempt with Go Mischief and Go Mystery turning around and heading back to port, but the booster recovery is still on for today with the first stage core B48.4 making its fourth flight, a historic day for SpaceX, the first time an orbital class booster launches for a fourth time, and it will attempt to land on, of course, I Still Love You, located about 630 kilometers northeast of Cape Canaveral. So stick around and we will be back to answer your questions and provide a bit more updates for you. And if you bear with me, guys, I'm getting the countdown net up right now on my phone so I can provide you with updates. Just give me a second and then we'll be back to talk you through the launch. NASA Spaceflight is the YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, everyone. So, welcome to Cape Canaveral. We have the launch loop up, and we can confirm to all of you that SpaceX and the launch team confirmed that all systems are go. We have passed the technical readiness poll and are proceeding down toward fueling of the Falcon 9 with super chilled liquid oxygen and RP1 kerosene. That fueling process will begin T-minus 35 minutes ahead of our targeted 9:56 a.m. liftoff time, which is 14:56 Universal Time. For those of you who know your time zone better in relation to UTC instead of EST. So all is proceeding on track, and we should be heading toward a fueling pole a couple of minutes before that, and we'll bring you the updates to that live. So let's talk a little bit first about the mission in general, and then we'll take some of the questions that you guys have been asking on the YouTube chat. Throw your questions up there. I've got Tom here, Tom Burghardt, the guy who wrote our launch article, with me, helping monitor that chat and passing along questions to me, so we'll get to those in a minute. But let's talk a little bit about Starlink and our flight today. So this is the first operational Starlink mission. It has 60 satellites on board inside the payload fairing at the top of the rocket there that you can see. Of those 60, there are 59, according to SpaceX, that are functioning, and one that has a problem that they don't expect will actually activate and be able to raise its orbit once it is released from the top of the Falcon 9. So they do expect one of those to re-enter and burn up in the atmosphere very quickly today, and over the course of the coming weeks. Unlike the first round of Starlink satellites, all of the 60 on here are fully demisable, meaning they will completely burn up in Earth's atmosphere, so that one that they don't expect will be operational has no chance of any of the components actually reaching the ground, which is very good. And another important step toward that recycling element and making sure that there's no threat posed to land from re-entering satellites. So that is a big thing for SpaceX today. Other big thing, this is the first time that the first stage of the Falcon 9 is being used for a fourth time. It previously flew on the Iridium 7 mission and the SAOCOM 1A mission out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California last year. It was the first Falcon 9 to perform a return to launch site landing at Vandenberg Air Force Base and landing zone 4. It was then trucked across the country and was used earlier this year to launch the Nusantara Satu communications satellite along with the Beresheet lunar lander to the moon in February, and has since been reconfigured for use on the Starlink flight. It has grid fins, it has landing legs, and they will attempt to land it 630-ish kilometers northeast of the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station on the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship. Now let's talk a little bit about something else in the recovery, the payload fairings. So these two payload fairing halves were first used on the Arabsat 6A mission earlier this year of the Falcon Heavy. They successfully and softly splashed down into the Atlantic Ocean and were recovered, refurbished, and are being reused. This is the first time ever that payload fairings are being reused on a rocket, another huge accomplishment and achievement for SpaceX. However, the original plan was that they would be recovered by Go Mischief and Go Mystery about 700 kilometers northeast of the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, but those two ships encountered some high seas and have called off the fairing recovery attempt and are getting out of those rough sea conditions and returning to port. So there will not be fairing catching recovery attempts today, although if SpaceX can fish them out of the water, they will do so. If not, they will splash down and not be recovered for reuse. So we'll wait to see what SpaceX says is the plan, if they'll try to fish them out of the water or not. The other major thing today, this is our first launch from a launch pad at Cape Canaveral in about 3 months. The last time we were here for a launch was the retirement flight of the Delta IV Medium back on the 22nd of August. So it has been an unusual launch drought here in Florida. but SpaceX will kick off a busy end to the year that includes 4 missions for them. This one, followed by the CRS-19 resupply mission to the International Space Station on December 4th. That is what that mission is currently targeting and tracking. That will then be followed by either the JC-Sat-18 telecommunications satellite launch or the in-flight abort of Crew Dragon. Those were the final 2 scheduled for this year. So, and within there too is also the Starliner orbital test flight on the Atlas V rocket. So a busy end to the year here at Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center. So let's head on over to chat. So let's head on over to the chat and let's see what people have been asking about. I know a lot of questions were probably asked about the fairing catchers, so that's what we've got. Hey, Page Rage, all the way from Canberra, Australia. Welcome to the stream. Hope you're enjoying it. And hoping you're sharing this as well with everyone else. We would be remiss, too, if we did not point out that the transit of Mercury is also occurring at this time. So little tiny Mercury is passing between Earth and the Sun, and if you have solar glasses and solar lenses that can allow you to view the Sun safely, do not go out and look at it directly. You can certainly go out and watch the transit of Mercury occurring as well, assuming you're in daylight. If you're on the night side of the planet, that probably won't do you any good if you can't see the sun. But yeah, definitely some awesome space collision today. So yes, so this is also the heaviest payload to date launched by SpaceX. So the original 60 Starlink satellites launched back in May were 227 kilograms each, and the operational Starlinks are 260 kilograms each, which gives a total, what did we calculate yesterday, Tom?
The total liftoff weight today is 15,600 kilograms, not including the payload.
So 15,600 kilograms is the payload launch mass, and that does not include the adapter that they all sit on as well. So another big first for SpaceX in their heaviest payloads to date. So just scrolling through the chat here, seeing what we've got. We are, so it's 9:09 here Eastern Time and launches at 9:56. So we are standing by to hear them get into their fueling pole at the T-minus 38-minute mark here. Emmanuel DP is asking that he doesn't see the gray thermal stripe on the second stage of the Falcon 9 that was on CRS-18. And you are correct, the second stage does not have that thermal strip. So back on CRS-18, they were testing a new thermal control system for long coast missions, basically that would allow heat transfer between the LOX tank and the RP-1 tank. So you have to keep the liquid oxygen very, very cold during the coast periods, and you have to keep the liquid kerosene warm. So that gray strip was testing that, but isn't needed on this particular flight today. So that is why you do not see it up there. But good eye there, good eye. So just scrolling through, making sure I'm not missing any questions here. So, all right. So there are questions here about how we access the comm nets for the countdown, and those are journalist-only loops. So anything that's reported over those, I'll update you all here for. So we have a question from Gal Adato, I hope I'm saying that right, asking why the Starlink satellites are so small. So basically, you make a satellite as big as you need it. And for the type of constellation that SpaceX has, that they will start building today, the satellites do not have to be very big, because what you're going for ultimately is global coverage and complete overlap in that coverage as well, so that no matter where you are on the surface of the Earth, you will be able to have line-of-sight access to Starlink satellites to have uninterrupted internet service. So for that reason, they don't have to be very big. for the constellation that SpaceX has designed. So that's how they're able to pack 60 of these things inside the payload fairing. And the fact that they are flat and can stack on top of one another helps tremendously for the launch as well. So again, so our launch window today actually opens at 9:50 EST and runs till 10:01 EST, which is 14:50 to 15:01 UTC. But they are targeting the in-plane, the exact center of that launch window, at 9:56. And it is 9:11 right now here on the East Coast. And yes, the weather is still good here at Cape Canaveral. We have no constraints for weather. The cumulus clouds they were worried about are well offshore. We can see them, but are not a concern. And the ground winds are quite light. But blowing kind of right at us, so we should get some good sound on the camera or through the camera for launch. And weather for the booster recovery is still good for today. Those rough seas that affected the fairing catcher vessels are not affecting the plans to attempt a recovery of the first stage on the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship, which is about 630 kilometers downrange, waiting to catch that. So let's talk a little bit about the deployment of the Starlink let's talk a little bit about the deployment of the Starlink satellites, because this is different than where they went previous. So, Tom, do you want to join me real quick? Because you wrote our article for this. So they're deploying into, they have different deployment orbits right now, don't they, Tom?
Yeah, so they've actually changed the plan from the very first Starlink mission. The Starlink mission originally was deploying into 440 kilometers orbit and then raising up to their operational 550 kilometer orbit from there. However, they recently got permission from the FCC to start deploying into a lower 280 kilometer orbit, and from there they will be raising up into a 350 kilometer orbit in order to drift to their orbital planes. Now, noteworthy, as we said, there's one satellite that SpaceX says might be dead, kind of dead upon arrival on launch today. That satellite will be left in its 280 kilometer orbit, and it will decay nice and quickly, so we're not leaving a lot of space junk up there. Otherwise, all the operational sats will go up to 350 kilometers. From there, they will drift to their orbital planes, and likely some of these satellites are going to different planes.
And we actually saw SpaceX test that, right, on the first 60 Starlinks, of how they're going to drift into different orbital planes.
Yes, absolutely. And then once that happens, once they're in that lower 350 kilometer orbit in their plane, they will use their Hall thrusters to raise their orbit up into that operational 550 kilometer altitude. And that is the long process that'll take anywhere from weeks to months, depending on what plane they're going to get into their operational orbit, that they can start providing, or at least start testing their internet service capabilities.
Awesome. So to recap there, so they used to deploy at 440 kilometers, but they are now deploying at 285 kilometers-ish, 285-ish kilometers, so much, much lower, raising up a little, drifting to their correct planes, and then raising up to their operational orbits, with that, of course, that one that we expect will be dead on arrival in orbit, which is kind of cool, isn't it, Tom? Yes. That, like we have, because normally if a satellite isn't working, the rocket stays on the ground, right, until it goes, but this is a very different cost calculation to whether or not you delay or just go.
Yeah. This is a very different kind of thing when we're launching 60 satellites at once, and you figure this is part of a constellation with thousands of satellites. You can actually spare a couple to kind of be dead on arrival, and that's why you have all the extra satellites to make up for when these satellites fail either on launch, or if a satellite malfunctions later, you'll have spares to make up for it. But it's very different from a normal satellite mission.
Yeah. So again, 9:15. So we are about 40-ish minutes away from our planned liftoff time. So we should be getting into our fueling poles here momentarily. And once they do that, they do have the ability to hold at certain points throughout the fueling process, which we'll go through today. So our orbital inclination today is 53 degrees. So if you were on the ground here in Florida watching it, it would look nearly identical to the path that the Falcon 9s take when they go to the International Space Station. And again, that the launch window itself actually opens about 6 minutes prior to liftoff, but they are targeting the dead center in plane time for maximum efficiency of the Falcon 9 and delivering the satellites to where they need to be. So according to SpaceX, after the first 6 launches, which if they launch 2 a month next year as the plan, being we would get to end of February, beginning of March, and then after you allow time for them to raise up to their operational orbits, SpaceX anticipates that they'll be able to begin offering service to the northern tier of the United States and Canada mid-2020, and then hopefully by late 2020, early 2021 to all of the United States as well, and then branching out to other markets as well around the globe. So that is the current plan there. As of right now, this is a good question. Will there be another Starlink launch this year? As of right now, the answer to that is no. The next one will be in January. And that is largely because SpaceX has a very, very busy December ahead of them with CRS-19 on the 4th, JCSat following in mid-December, and IFA, the in-flight abort for the Crew Dragon capsule, coming in around that time as well, and also working around a busy Cape schedule in December with those 3 missions, as well as the orbital flight test of Starliner.
And also another element of that is, as you know, they recently got this permission to deploy into a lower orbit. That was actually granted as a special temporary authority to use that orbit. It only lasts for, I think, 2 months. The FCC still has yet to give a more permanent decision on that plan, and SpaceX is continuing to tweak how many satellites they're going to use, what altitude they're going to be at, till they figure out exactly the best way to make this constellation work. So there's also a chance that there may be delays as SpaceX waits out and figures out what the best way to deploy their satellites are. But for right now, no more launches this year.
Indeed. And yes, guys, I am seeing your comments. It is windy here. You've got to remember. And our big heavy-duty tripod is holding our video camera onto the ground at the launch pad for real up-close videos, but we are aware of that. This is the first time we're live streaming a launch without DOS here, but thank you to DOS. We need to definitely do a shout-out to DOS Valdez for all of the equipment and everything that we are using today. So thank you, man, for helping us bring this to you guys. So, yes.
Also, Mike Deep is here for NASA Spaceflight. He'll be capturing photos from the viewing site, and of course has remote cameras set up at the pad. So, looking forward to bringing you guys that stuff as well.
Yeah, and I see a question here about how close we are. We are actually 3 miles from the launch pad on the ITL Causeway. So we're as close as they let the general public and the media get to these launches. And Daniel, you're asking a question here about, are there already orbit predictions for these satellites immediately? Will you be able to see them train over the UK tonight? That is a good question. Tonight, probably not, because of the time of day that we are launching. But once they are up there, pay attention to places like Heavens Above, the Heavens Above website that will track them and give you the viewing opportunities. So yeah, once they launch, give it about a day for the what are called the 2-line element, the TLEs, which are all of the orbital calculations that are released every day, to find them and catalog them, and then that will be and then that'll give you the viewing locations around the world of where they'll be viewable for the next few days before they start to disperse out and when you won't be able to see them anymore. But yes, I'm super jealous for the people like in Europe and Michigan and portions of the United States for the first round of Starlinks that got to see all of them training after one another after the first launch. That was wicked cool.
And if you want to see some footage of that, NASA Spaceflight's Brady Keniston was able to capture some video of that from Michigan, and that is on the NASA Spaceflight YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen that, feel free to check it out.
Definitely. And so there are currently about 50-ish Starlink satellites up there. They were the test batch that were launched but that's how much are up there. But these are the first batch of the operational Starlinks, the ones that will actually be beaming down internet for commercial and military use. But it is worth noting too, Tom, right, that Elon confirmed that the first batch of Starlinks that are up there have been tested somewhat successfully with the military for sending secured and encrypted communications and everything, demonstrating part of their capability. So we are, 9:21, so 20, 30, 40, 50, so we are about 35 minutes away from liftoff. We have not heard any call out over the net. I have the net up, and a no call out over the net is good. Tom is checking Twitter. But no call out over the net means that the automated process is tracking as expected, so they should be fueling at this point. And again, no call out over the net is what we want to hear, or what we don't want to hear, actually. A silent countdown for SpaceX is good, just like for Northrop Grumman, a talkie countdown is good. So different all over the place, but that is it.
Yeah, as of now, all systems are progressing nominally towards a 9:56 Eastern Time liftoff.
There we go. So 9:56. So we're still tracking toward 9:56 at this time. A great question here from Alan Bujanda. I hope I'm saying that right. Asking about why this particular launch corridor was chosen by SpaceX. So the 53-degree inclination is the better answer to that. So SpaceX has a bunch of different orbital corridors that they want to launch into, all in the 53-degree inclination line, and that is the orbital inclination they need to get to be able to provide and get this service up very quickly to the most populated parts of the planet. So that is why they picked the 53-degree inclination. As to why today they picked this particular corridor to launch into, that all just sort of plays into where they wanted these satellites to be at certain times of day as they start to build the constellation out. So there was certainly a technical reason why the team opted for this particular corridor today, which gives us our 9:56 a.m. liftoff time. What that precise reason is, they haven't released, but they're not going to rendezvous with anything, so it's not like that was a consideration, but this will now play a consideration into what all the other corridors are for all the other campaigns coming up. So once this one launches today, that sets the, okay, now we're locked into, if we want to go into like corridor 3 instead of corridor 1, this is our precise launch time that we have to go to. So that's what we'll be looking for later on.
And an important element of this also, even though these are the first operational satellites, SpaceX is going to continue testing them, continue testing their ground stations as well. They have several ground stations across the United States, and that's what they're using to test out, make sure all of it on those satellites are working. And so that might be a factor as to they need the satellites to pass over certain ground stations at certain times. So that's one possible consideration as well. This is an ongoing testing process as they start to develop this operational constellation of satellites.
And the throughput of these satellites in terms of like what you'll be able to get in your home is either equal to or better than your current internet landline provider for that. And Tom, do we have an update on anything?
All systems are running nominally at this time. Again, no calls on the countdown net,
Cool.
So always good. Had one question about the difference between these operational satellites and the 60 satellites that were launched before. The previous satellites are not duds, and they could even possibly play a role as operational satellites. However, they're missing a couple functions, one of which is the Ka-band antennas.
Yes.
There's supposed to be Ka-band and Ku-band. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Both bands of antennas on each Starlink satellite. The original satellites were lacking those Ka-band antennas. So these operational satellites have an extra antenna, and that just increases the overall amount of data those satellites can transmit. They are also slightly redesigned so that upon re-entry, every satellite will be 100% completely destroyed upon re-entry. Previous iteration, about 5% of the components are expected to actually survive re-entry and fall back to Earth. But other than that, those are the two major changes that we know of as far as these operational satellites on board today.
Yeah, and we also have a question about, for the initial round of constellation, how many satellites will be in each plane. That's That's kind of changing. SpaceX has petitioned the FCC and the FAA to change the number of planes and how many satellites are in each. We do know, what is it, 1,542?
1,584 satellites in the original 550-kilometer shell is the current plan.
So 1,584 satellites, but exactly how many of those will be in each plane and how many planes there will be depends on what the FCC and the FAA ultimately approve of SpaceX's change in request that they have put forward. You will need a transceiver and receiver device that Starlink will sell to receive the internet. It's not like your phone will just detect a Starlink signal like it does cell towers or other Wi-Fi networks, so you will need that. What is the life on one of these satellites? So SpaceX hasn't really said what the operational life is. What we do know is that they plan to routinely refresh the constellation. So they have thought ahead in terms of planning for, like, as performance degrades or as they can make more efficient satellites, that they will constantly refresh and replace the constellation. In biology, kind of like your skin refreshes itself in that regard, so a very biological approach to this as well. So at this point, we are fueling the Falcon 9 with, so the first stage right now is being filled with super cold liquid oxygen and liquid RP1 kerosene, and the second stage is being filled only with RP1 kerosene right now. At 18 minutes before launch, the liquid oxygen load into the second stage will be stopped, and the RP1 load into the second stage will be stopped 18 minutes before launch, and the liquid oxygen will then be loaded starting at T-minus 16 minutes. So the second stage loads RP1 first, stops, and then loads the liquid oxygen with RP1 and stable replenish, and the second stage loads both the RP1 and liquid oxygen at the same time. So coming up here, the big visual we're looking for will be the big vent at T-minus 20 minutes of gaseous oxygen coming out, and that will be our big cue that everything is going well. And thank you to the 1,600 of you who are watching this live. Keep your questions coming in chat. I'm doing my best to try to make sure we're not missing any, but if I have missed some, go ahead and repost them and we will answer them. So the Starlink constellation and network is expected to be live mid-next year for people in the northern states of the United States and the provinces of Canada, and then by the end of the year or beginning of 2021 for the entirety of the US, and then rolling out around the world as well. So if we take a look at the pad right now, actually, so the building you're seeing right below the transporter erector, sorry, I had to put my computer down. So the building you see there at the base, underneath the rocket and the gray transporter erector, and you can see the bulbous top of the payload fairing there sticking out above the TE. So that building down below is actually the horizontal integration facility at Slick 40, the HIF. Where they assembled this mission and this booster, and then you can see the 4 lightning towers around it. And you can see to the right-hand side of the screen a dome-like structure, which is one of the liquid oxygen tanks at Slick 40, at the pad 40 with it. And then you can see a white building that looks like it's at the pad, but that is actually a perspective difference. That building is miles away from the pad, but that's our basic view of what you guys are looking at right now. For your orientation to the left of your screen, I cannot move the camera and show it to you. Give us 1 second. Can you call in the stream to the comment that on the phone? It just dropped on mine. So to the left of this image would be Slick 41, where the ULA Atlas V rocket launches from, and where they are stacking the Atlas V for the OFT. And further to the left is Pad 39A, and further to the left is Pad 39B. If you would go to the right, that's where Pad 37B is, where the Delta IV Heavy rockets launch from United Launch Alliance as well. So that is our quick update on geography and what we are looking at. So let's see if we've got any more questions here as we can go through. So someone's asking, why does NASA appear at the bottom of the screen? So our company name is NASASpaceflight, so that's our water brand logo that you are seeing there. NASA is not affiliated with this mission in any particular way. For those wondering when you'll be able to buy Starlink internet service, SpaceX and Starlink will have that information out once the constellation build gets underway, but again, expected by mid-2020 for that initial offering in the northern US and the Canadian provinces. So Dion Dirk said that he heard this is going to be a record-breaking launch, and that is correct. The first stage is being reused for the 4th time, and it is the heaviest payload to date at just over 15,000 kilograms of payload weight at liftoff. Again, we are still tracking toward a 9:56 a.m. liftoff time, Eastern Standard Time, which is 14:56 UTC. So in South Florida, Greg, you are asking what direction is the trajectory. So the trajectory out of Cape Canaveral is to the northeast. Very, very similar, almost identical to a station mission launch. This one is going into a 53-degree inclination orbit, whereas the station flights are at 51.6-degree inclination orbits. So unfortunately for South Florida, not the best viewing trajectory, but as we have reported on NSF, you guys might get a really good treat next year in March when the SAOCOM 1B mission, if it is approved to launch from here, will do a polar launch trajectory where it would actually head south from Cape Canaveral and thread that needle between the east coast of Florida and the western Bahamian Islands. So definitely look out for that, because that'll be a great viewing opportunity for those of you in South Florida. And yes, for those of you, so yes, when I said SLIC 40 as the pad, SLIC stands for Space Launch Complex, or SLC. Forgive me if I use an acronym that you guys don't understand, please ask in chat. Not trying to be overly confusing, it's just how my brain thinks after 12 years of acronyms. So that is what happens there. So this launch is taking place from Cape Canaveral, 9:56. We're still on target for that, and we are waiting to see that big T-minus 20-minute vent in about 2.5 minutes from now is when we expect that, but really any time now, and that'll be a good visual indicator as well that everything's on track, including the fact that SpaceX has confirmed that everything's on track for us as well.
One question about the other bands that are used on these satellites. The only bands that Starlink satellites will be using right now are the Ku and Ka bands. As far as we know, there are no other plans to use any sort of other wavelengths for their communications.
And we do have a question here from, I just lost it. I scrolled past it too far. I'm sorry, I don't have your name, but you were asking if you would be able to see these satellites in orbit from South Africa, and you very well might be. There's a good website called heavensabove.com that once these satellites are launched, give it half a day to a day, and then check Heavens Above. You can plug in your exact coordinates and location, and once these satellites are being tracked in orbit, that website is a great resource for you to be able to tell if you'll be able to have visual sightings and passes of these satellites as they come overhead. So definitely check that website, heavensabove.com. Go ahead, Tom.
Some questions in chat about the recovery efforts today. In case you are unaware, the fairing recovery vessels Go Mistree and Go Mischief have returned to land from their recovery zone, presumably due to some rough seas out there, so there will be no fairing recovery effort today. However, of course I still love you, the drone ship is still stationed about 630 kilometers downrange to the northeast of the launch pad, and there will still be an attempt to recover the first stage of Falcon 9 for the 4th time for this particular booster.
Yes, indeed. Yes, so again, sadly no fairing recovery attempt, but we can, But you know, these fairings are being used for a second time. That's a huge plus for this mission, and a huge plus for SpaceX that really wanted to start reusing as much of the Falcon 9 as possible. First time in history that payload fairings are being reused. No one, aside from SpaceX, has tried to catch payload fairings before for this mission. And there is the big T-minus 20-minute vent of gaseous oxygen coming out of the Falcon 9. That's exactly the visual we wanted to see. We have good venting, so that's 20 minutes away. So 9:56 Eastern Time, which is 14:56 Universal Time. So that is exactly what we want to see. And Tom, it's still quiet on the loop, correct?
Yep, we're not hearing anything on the countdown. The countdown is active. We're hearing some background noise, so you know the feed's working.
Yes.
And as you can see, venting has started at pad 40. All the processes are going well, heading for that 9:56 Eastern Time liftoff, 14:56 Universal Time.
Yes, and it's worth noting 60 Starlink satellites are on board this rocket, but SpaceX did confirm last night that one of them is expected to be dead on arrival in orbit. A slight chance that it might work once it deploys with the rest of them from the top of the Falcon 9, but probably not. So we'll probably end up with 59, according to SpaceX, of the 60 working. And of course, there's always a chance that some of the others might not function exactly as planned. But this is a very different calculus than what we've seen on other launches, where you want the satellite to be operating perfectly right before launch. In this case, when you're launching 60 at a time and you're talking about a tens of thousands of satellite constellation, sometimes it's cheaper, as in this case, to just take the loss of the one satellite that you know is dead inside the payload fairing and just launch anyway. That way you get all 59 that are working up in space and you've only lost one. So very, very different calculus. So 53-degree inclination orbit, 9:56 Eastern is our target, but the window does extend to 10:01 Eastern, so they do have a 5-minute window if there should be any type of technical issue that they might want to stop for a few minutes for. They do have that capability. So, and that is 60 Starlinks, 60, that are on board today. So again, thank you so much for the nearly 3,000 of you who are watching and joining us. If you are just joining us, everything is on track for a launch today. You are seeing the Falcon 9 on Space Launch Complex 40, or Slick 40, as it is called. Pad 40, another term for that. Venting its gaseous oxygen. This is a normal vent. It's what we really want to see at this point in the countdown. So everything is looking good at this time. In addition to our live stream today, we do have remote cameras, still photography from Mike Deep, our photographer, at Pad 40, as well as a video remote that we hope to be able to bring you later tonight. Mike also has his super duper zoom spy lens here to bring you great photos of the Falcon 9 as she lifts off. And of course, our live stream today will track the launch for as far as we can take it, and we will keep this live stream live through Falcon 9 getting into its initial orbit. And then we will see what we can do from there to continue to bring you updates. But definitely keep an eye on the rocket, and give us one quick minute. I'm going to step away really quick. After talking for 40 minutes, I need to take a quick drink of water here. So give us a quick moment. Keep throwing your questions into the chat in YouTube, and I will be back in about a minute.
This year.
Okay, thank you. After a drink of coffee, I'm back. All right, so we are about 15 minutes away from launch. So at this point in our countdown, the second stage has been loaded with its RP-1 kerosene, and that fueling has stopped and gone into stable replenish mode, and they are now fueling the second stage of the Falcon 9 with its densified liquid oxygen. Fueling of liquid oxygen and RP-1 simultaneously into the first stage is continuing at this point. So if you are just joining us, thank you. I see the Lake Baikal region, the Philippines, India, South Africa, Australia, Russia, Indonesia. Thank you all for joining us from around the world. This view is coming to you thanks to a bunch of equipment that our friend and launch partner Das Valdez sent us. And we are 3 miles away from Pad 40, Space Launch Complex 40, due south of the rocket. So we should have a great view of it as it heads northeast onto its 53-degree inclination orbit. So another little quick fact about this, so for this particular booster recovery, this will be the 45th booster recovery. Again, that is if it lands successfully, which we hope it will and have every thought that it will. So 45th booster recovery for SpaceX, which is amazing when you think about that it was less than 4 years ago, December of 2015, that the very first booster landed successfully back here at Cape Canaveral. It was actually a return to launch site landing for the Orbcomm 2 mission, which was SpaceX's return to flight mission. I mean, what a way to return to flight on that. And since that day on December of 2015, we have had 44 successful booster landings and recoveries, and a lot of booster reuses too.
So that includes 3 different landings and recoveries of this particular booster. This booster has flown 2 missions out of Vandenberg, launched the Iridium 7 mission, which landed on Just Read the Instructions, the other SpaceX drone ship. It also landed on LZ-4 after the Falcon 1A mission out of Vandenberg. After that, it headed over to the East Coast, launched the Nusantara Satu mission, which also included the Israeli Bereshit lunar lander. That landing was on Of Course I Still Love You, and today the booster will hopefully be returning to Of Course I Still Love You after launching this Starlink mission.
Indeed. And you can go ahead, since the SpaceX stream is live, you can take off, you can put that on play. Oh no, I'm sorry, you can put that on a speakerphone so we can listen to it now. Cool. So we are still standing by. We are about 11 minutes now away from our scheduled liftoff time. Again, that's 9:56 is our scheduled liftoff time with a 5-minute launch window that runs until 10:01. So if they should need to stop for a few minutes, they totally can. So some other things for those of you who are just joining us. So these 60 operational Starlink satellites will be deploying into a lower orbit than the first 60 test satellites did back in May. So those test satellites back in May went into a 440-kilometer orbit at first where they deployed. These are going into a 285-kilometer orbit, so much, much lower. They will then begin to fan out and spread out into their various orbital planes after raising themselves initially to 350 kilometers. Once they drift to operational plan, they will then raise themselves up to the operational altitude of 550 kilometers. So if you can hear behind me, the SpaceX stream has started and they are broadcasting it for the media here. So some of that you will hear from them as well. So that's the noise in the background. So now 11 minutes and counting, and everything's still going well. Fueling of the Falcon 9 still underway. And Tom, you got any updates for us?
All good so far. There was one update on the SpaceX webcast that you just mentioned. SpaceX confirms the fairing recovery attempt was cut off due to rough seas in the recovery zone. That is why the ships have returned to port to keep those ships and their crews safe.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, while they are reflying a fairing for the first time, those fairings will not be caught by the recovery ships today.
Yeah, and even though it's a very calm weather day here in Florida, we did have a pretty significant cold front that is descending across the U.S., and there is pretty rough seas off the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina, where the ASDS, the Autonomous Spaceport Drone Ship, of course, I Still Love You, is waiting to catch the booster. That recovery attempt is still on. They are about 300 kilometers off the coast of 300 kilometers off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, but 630 kilometers northeast of the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And just a bit too rough for the seas for the payload fairing recovery vessels, but not for the good old Of Course I Still Love You, which, what's not to love about Of Course I Still Love You? You know, it's a good ship. It does its job well. So yeah, keep throwing your questions up into the chat for YouTube if you've got them. We will do our best to answer all of them as we go forward. But we are now 9 minutes, 20 seconds away from our planned launch. So we are in the business end of the countdown. So the big thing that will happen now in the next few minutes, so the Falcon 9 is already on its auto sequence. That takes over at T-minus 35 minutes when fueling begins. So what will happen now is what's known as LOX drain back, liquid oxygen drain back, or engine chill down for SpaceX is what they call it. But that's when they actually pour some of the super cold liquid oxygen from the first stage into the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the Falcon 9 to cryogenically condition them for launch. You don't want ambient air temperature engines to suddenly be hit with negative 200 degree Fahrenheit propellant at ignition. You want to thermally condition them down to the good levels so everything is good. So that will happen at about T-minus 7 minutes. The transporter erector will pull back about 3.5 minutes from launch to an initial 88.5 degree orientation from 90 degree and be armed and primed for its fast rapid retract and fall away when the rocket lifts off. So at 1 minute, everything will be confirmed go for launch, and the Falcon 9 will be configured for flight. The final tanks will be pressurized for flight on the first and second stages, and then Merlin engine ignition will be commanded at T-minus 2 seconds with liftoff at T-minus 0. And then it will be a very quick sequence of events. So the Falcon 9 will reach orbit after about 9 minutes, and then it will coast until about 46 minutes, where its second stage will then reignite to get it into the proper orbit for Starlink deployment, which will occur 60 minutes after liftoff, or 1 hour after liftoff. And SpaceX will be bringing all of that to you live. We will be bringing you the launch live, so stick with us if you want to see what it is like to feel and witness and hear a rocket launch here from Cape Canaveral. Woo, baby! Coming up next is a rapid succession of events, starting off with main engine cutoff, or what we call MECO,
followed immediately by stage separation. That's the separation of the first stage from the second stage. And then seconds after will be the lighting of our second stage engine, which we call second engine startup, or SES-1. That is coming up here in about 45 seconds. And we've got a great view this morning with some pretty clear blue skies, the Earth in the background. If you're just now joining us, we are 30 seconds away from main engine cutoff, stage separation, and SES-1.
There she is.
What you see on your screen, you should be able to see the stages separate. About 10 seconds here.
Stage separation confirmed.